Yo. Okay, so we're gonna now look at the next Ian Smith story, okay, which is gonna be the Red Door. And essentially what this text, okay, focuses on fundamentally is the idea of conformity. Okay, conformity. That's a word that you want to write down right from the beginning. Okay, conformity, which is another way of saying to make yourself fit in with the group. Okay. So essentially, this text is focused on a man called Murdo, and basically, this man has spent his entire life trying to fit in. Okay, trying to fit in. He's made himself. He's essentially given up his individuality, right? And he has prioritized being part of the group, which in his case is a village, right? It's like a village, the place where he lives. So Murdo essentially has lost his individuality, and up to this point, before the story starts, he's basically traded in his individuality in order to uh, try and be as much like everyone else as he can be. Basically, that's the idea. All right. So we're gonna look at the ideas of conformity and the consequences of it, and the dangers of it. Basically, when we look at this text. Okay. Okay. So yeah, that's going to be the main kind of focus. The idea of conformity and the danger of conformity, and then also the idea, converse to that or opposite to that of individuality. Okay, so we begin the red door. Okay, so it begins when Murdo, make this bigger. When Murdo woke up after Halloween and went out into the cold air to see whether anything was stirring in the world around him, he discovered that his door, which had formerly been painted green, has now been painted red. Okay, so a couple things. First, the story starts out with the idea of Halloween. Halloween is the season where people dress up when they pretend to be something that they're not. Already, immediately giving you the idea, like I said, of conformity. Okay, of conformity. So, excuse me, the story starts there, and basically what happens is he leaves his house, he goes outside, and he notices that his door has been painted red, hence the title. Okay, he stared at it for a long time, blah blah. Essentially, he looks at the door and he's trying to make sure that it's actually painted red. He's a bit groggy because he's just woken up, and so, excuse me, he has to double check if it's actually really painted red. Yeah. Anyway, so then it goes on to sort of describe what he's like as a person. Okay. Now, Murdo was a bachelor, meaning he's single, he's by himself, who had never brought himself to propose marriage to anyone. Okay, so he's single. He lived by himself, prepared his own food, darned his own socks, washed his own clothes. He was liked by everybody. This is a really important quote. He was liked by everybody since he didn't offend anyone by gossiping and maintained a long silence unless he had something important to say. Okay, so he was liked by everyone since he didn't offend anyone. Okay, so essentially, Murdo does his best, okay, to not say anything or do anything which could be considered offensive. All right. You could think about Murdo as like what people today call someone that's I don't know, say like virtue signal or something. Like think about the people that, people make fun of today or people dislike today who are seen as being fake, essentially because they just repeat what the popular opinion is, even if they don't believe it. So they repeat the popular opinion so that the people will like them or so that people at the very least won't hate them. Okay. So Murdo is like that. Okay, he basically looks at what does everyone believe, what does everyone think, how does everyone talk, how does everyone dress. Let me imitate that, let me copy that, and let me do that so that I blend in and so that people are not offended by anything that I say. Okay, so Murdo is not really a person, he's more like a mask. Okay, at this point in the story, he's like a mask, he's not a person, he's a mask. Now, this is extremely relevant to our time today because it's extremely tempting to turn yourself into a mask, especially if you're younger, because of modern day cancel culture. Okay. So because people are afraid of getting cancelled, in other words, having people be offended by them and then facing the consequences of that offense, like people coming at them on social media and all that, leaving mean comments or whatever. Because there is a fear of that, then people are very tempted, especially young people. They're very tempted, okay, to put on a mask and to not really say what they think and to not really act, excuse me, as themselves. Okay, to not really put forward their, excuse me, to put forward their authentic self. Instead, to put on a mask, which other people will be okay with them wearing or acting like. And we're gonna see why this is not a good idea. Okay, why this is not a good idea to do. Okay, so in any case, it goes on to say the previous night, children had knocked on his door and sung songs to him. He gave them apples and oranges. Okay, so he gives kids the trick or treat type things. Having made sure he was in his own house again, he went and studied the door for a second time. When he touched the red paint, he found that it was quite dry. He had no feeling of anger, only puzzlement. Okay, so basically, what's happened to him is that he's been conforming for so long. Okay, so he's been acting the same as everyone else for so long that this simple event of his door having its color changed, what you could assume is some kind of prank or something. This simple event shakes his whole world, yeah. This simple event shakes his whole um life, his and makes him question his own behavior and his existence. Okay, so what it basically illustrates is that, like I said, he has been conforming for so long that this is like a major event to him, even though it's quite simple in reality. Okay, Murdo had never done anything unusual. Murdo had never done anything in his life that was unusual. He felt like he should be as like the other villagers as possible. Look, he reads the newspaper like they do. He sleeps the same way they do, and he even plays the same kind of games with them that or that they do. Okay. Okay. Nevertheless, there were times when he felt there was more to life than that. He would feel this, especially on summer nights. And then it goes on to say basically he Murdo has a essentially like a battle within himself, which is that he knows, okay, that the way he's acting isn't correct. In other words, okay, now let's talk about conformity. All right. So so we all exist as individuals. Let's start with this. Okay, so you're born as an individual. Okay, you're born as an individual, and you're born into a world which is already inhabited by other individuals, other people, basically. Okay. Now, what happens as you grow up is that you start to get integrated into different groups. Okay. So the first group obviously is your family, uh, or your adopted family if you're or adopted. But let's just say you're born, for most people, you're born into the family structure. Okay. So then you lose some of your individuality, some of your pure individuality. You lose some of it because you start to become a family member, okay, raised by your parents or parent, or sibling, whatever, and you start to get sort of conditioned into behaving like a group member, a family member, a person who is in the family, a son or a brother or whatever other title represents group membership. Okay, then you go to school and now you become a pupil. You become a student and you learn to behave like a pupil. You learn like that group, those group rules. So all these in themselves are not necessarily a bad thing. Uh, these acts of conformity, because what you're doing basically is you're getting taught how to get along with other people. Essentially, that's what you're getting taught to do. Yeah, you're getting taught how to not. You're essentially getting taught good ethics and morality, which is all about how to behave in a way which doesn't hurt people, like actually hurt people, real hurt. Um, so you have to in some cases, in some areas, to not hurt other people like in a real way. You have to learn to give up some of your choices, your individuality to some extent, because obviously you might want to punch someone, okay, but that's not okay yet. That's the idea. So you have to learn, okay, I want to hit this guy, but it's not good if I do that yet, like that, unless they deserve it. No, I'm joking. But the point is, you understand what I'm saying, okay? You can't just punch someone if they, for example, I don't know, you're having a bad day and you want to punch someone to get feel better. You can't do that yet. That's not allowed yet. So the point is you learn how to sort of manage your own behavior so that you can become a member of society and you're not like a strange guy yet. So people who don't integrate themselves, people who don't learn how to conform to some extent, who don't learn how to become group members to some extent, we call them like weirdos, we call them strange, we call them rejects or something. Yeah, they basically are pushed to the fringes of society. Um, they are called loners sometimes. And all those things basically mean that this person doesn't know how to socialize. They don't know how to act like a group member. So other group members, other people essentially don't like them to some extent. Okay, anyway, so what I'm saying is conformity in itself is not necessarily a bad thing in this way. Okay, in this way, when when someone is learning how to behave well with other people so that they can form relationships and have the feeling of community and all that stuff and family and all that. That's good, yeah. Friendship. Okay, now conformity, when it goes beyond this, then it starts to become a problem. Okay, so, excuse me, conformity begins to become a problem, okay, when the person doesn't stop, uh, doesn't stop with just sort of learning how to get along with other people or learning how to, not hurt other people, like in a real way, and then basically now getting back to their individuality. In other words, what you really want is you want to learn how to behave and get along with other people, have good manners, have respect and all that. And then you want to start to explore your own self, your identity, who you are based on your deep intuition, your deep instinct, that the ideas you have inside of who you are, the feeling you have of who you are, your natural gifts and talents and all that. You want to start to basically bring that out, yeah, and that's how you have like the authentic kind of person. That's how you become you, yeah, you as an individual, unique and apart from everyone else. So that's what you want to do, yeah. Which is what happens with, let's just say, in general, that's what happens, yeah. You start to form your personality and all that. But where it goes wrong, okay, where it goes wrong is when the end that you could call it individualization. Okay, I just invented a term. Call it individualization. Individualization. When that separation from the group doesn't happen, or the return to the individual, when that doesn't happen, and the conformity is made even more extreme. So, for example, like the person not only now tries not to hurt other people, but now they actively say self-censor. Yeah, this is a big problem that we have today. The idea of self-censorship, not saying the truth, not saying something that you believe, not living in the way that you know is good and that you know is the way that you should be living, based on fear or based on wanting to conform, wanting to fit into the group. So this is what happens. This is what happens with Murdo, okay, is that he never expresses his individuality. He continues with the conformity to his own detriment. So he doesn't hurt other people, and then he goes beyond that and he begins to hurt himself out of his desire to sort of be a group member. Yeah, that's the point. Okay, um, so that's the idea, okay, in the poem and the story. Okay, anyway, so then what happens is he goes on to now describe. So the speaker goes on to now describe Murdo's different attempts at having relationships. So he tries to have a relationship with one woman, um, but he leaves because she feeds him something strange. He doesn't like the food. And then there's another woman, okay, it's called Mary, and she dresses in red clothes. And the key with Mary is that uh, Mary represents the ideal of being the individual, and that Mary is okay with being different. Okay, Mary is okay with being different, and excuse me, and she's okay with standing out. Yeah, that's the point. So Murdo likes her because in himself, again, remember, in himself, he uh deep in his heart, he knows that he shouldn't be killing his own self yet. He shouldn't be killing his own unique self in order to, you know, because he's afraid of standing out. Yeah, he should stand out to some extent. Um, And so Mary represents that for him, which is why he likes her a lot in a deep way. Okay, he loves her to some extent. Um, so what happens is uh he continues looking at the door, okay, and he begins to think about the door, and he begins to think about the ideas which I've just expressed. He begins to think about his life and his life to this point, and what other people might say, when they see the door and when they see um, his house and how they might judge him sort of after that. Okay, so the the next day, um, he he begins to think. Okay, he begins to think that people, when they walk past his house, they're gonna now notice that he has a different door, a unique door, and they're now going to essentially judge him for it. Okay, it's going to gather attention to itself. And he says, I've always sought to hide among other people. I agree with what anyone tells me. If I think I should go to church, I go to church, and so on. Okay, so this illustrates one of the main issues, okay, with conformity, with sacrificing yourself. And I would say that in two words, your self, sacrificing yourself, meaning your identity, your true self, who you are, to the group. We're gonna talk about now like the problems that brings about. Okay, so one of the fundamental problems is one of the biggest issues with conformity, okay, or sacrificing who you are for the good of the group, is that basically this is the source or the fundamental foundation of tyranny, basically. So every dictatorship is essentially based on the idea that the group is more important than the individual. So every dictatorship is based on the idea that the group is more important than the individual. Now, this is obviously kind of ironic because the ideals of the dictatorship, which is that it's all about us collectively, we the German people, or we the great nation of workers, we the great Soviet state, or we the great people's Republic of China, yeah, or we the great people of North Korea collectively. It's supposed to be about the collective. No man is more important than another man. No man has more power than another man. No man works for another man. We all work for the good of the state, us as a collective, a family, something like that. Now, that's supposed to be the ideal, okay, which sounds good, yeah. That a homeless man and a king, we cut away all the titles, all the class difference, and now we are just one. That's the ideal, which sounds great. But if you look at the reality of these situations, there's always a pyramid that forms, okay, and you have one dictator at the top. Or you have one dictator. The way it's formed is you have one dictator, and then underneath him you have some mini dictators who are like his little enforcers, yeah, his captains. Um, in any case, what you need to know, okay, is that essentially every tyranny is based on this idea, okay, sacrificing the individual to the group. And what I'm going to show you, okay, is something uh, uh, which is quite insane, which relates to this. Um, okay, so when Hitler was forming the original Nazi party, okay, before it became the Nazi party that we know. So this is essentially the Nazi party in 1920. Okay, so this is before the war and everything else. Uh, Hitler and excuse me, another individual um basically created this document which had 25 points, and it was a 25-point plan. And this is what they based the sort of government which they came up with, which would turn into the Nazi Party, essentially. This is what they based it on. Okay. Now, what I'm going to show you, okay, in this is essentially a direct real world example of what I'm talking about. Okay. And what you're going to see is Look, all citizens of the state shall be equal as regards to rights and obligations. Sounds great, yeah. Sounds great. Sounds great. Okay. Now there's one which is even more sort of directly connected to what I'm talking about, which is that here, this one. Look at this. This statement right here, excuse me, is the foundation, okay, of the entire tyranny that turned into the Nazi regime, okay? And it's not just unique to the Nazi party, but any tyranny, even modern tyrannies like in China with the communists, or in North Korea with Kim Jong, or in any other kind of tyrannical state where you have a few individuals in charge of a population who have no say over the voting, like in any of the monarchies, modern monarchies, Saudi Arabia, anything like that, where you have a family or whatever that are in power and you have no ability to vote them out, you have no say over who rules you. Always the foundational principle is that it's about the common interest, meaning the group, meaning the state, the group, over the individual interest. Okay? So where conformity goes extremely wrong is that, excuse me, as soon as you say that the group is more important than the individual, then you have the justification to kill any individual who is seen as a potential threat to the group. Do you understand? So as soon as we make it okay to place the group over the individual, then the group, which really means the person in charge of the group, which we call a dictator, okay, now has the justification, now has the uh, power and ability to kill any individual who seems to be a threat to the group. And I say seems to be a threat because all this means is now who seems to be a threat to that dictator's power. Okay? Which is why you see journalists being killed, like when Saudi Arabia killed that guy Khashoggi, or you see uh, like family members of the ruling party, yeah, like when Kim Jong killed that his I don't know, was his brother-in-law or something, killed the other guy in the airport. Um, um, you see that you now have the justification, okay, to do anything essentially, which you can now label as this person is an enemy of the state. He's an enemy of the people. She's an enemy of the people. And so, in order for the sake of the people, for the sake of the people, we now can hurt this person. Okay, we now can hurt the person. That's why conformity, that's the evil part of conformity. Okay, if it's allowed to go too far. Conformity must always serve the individual. Okay, the rules and the laws must always serve the good of the individual. Always. It has to be this way because if it's not this way, then you get a tyranny. Okay, you get a tyranny. Things become very bad very quickly. Okay, so this is why conformity, like what Murdo's doing, this is why it's so bad. And we all know this instinctively. Okay, we all know and understand instinctively that um another person is just like you. Yeah, you know that instinctively. It's ideas and stories and propaganda and training which forces you to ignore that inner voice that you have, and training, not training, that truth that you have. It's a training which forces you to ignore that and to let go of that and to not pay attention to that voice inside, and to sort of submit yourself to the group, even when that's at your own detriment, when it harms you in some way, and when it very likely actually harms the individuals which make up the group. So you see, it's a very big problem here. It's not just something small, it's a very big thing. And you see him describing that here. He has essentially turned himself into a slave, okay, to the group, okay? And again, you need to remember that it's not really about the group, because the group, if the group is 100 people, those 100 people don't agree on everything, right? So it's not the group, it's whoever is made to be the biggest influence over the group, right? In any case, it's a bad idea. Yeah, it's a very bad idea. Which is why we fought. Why your ancestors, why my ancestors fought, huh? To be for their rights, huh? To be free. They fought and died to be free. That's why. Okay. Anyway, I go to church. If they want me to cut pizza for them, I have, and blah blah blah. He basically describes now how he has turned himself into a slave. Like I said. Excuse me. The red door stood out against the whiteness of the frost and snow. Seemed to be saying something to him to ask him a question. Now you can just imagine the red door is a representation of his inner voice or his inner truth, the thing that he knows inside of him. That's what the door is. Okay, who he should be, how he should act. That's the door. Bold and standing as himself. Okay, it was pleading him not to destroy it. Again, to not ignore this inner voice. I don't want to be green. This is him talking. I don't want to stay here. There must be somewhere for me as myself. This is Murdo talking. What is wrong with red anyway? Means what's wrong with me as I am? Wine, of course, was red and so was blood. He drank none of the former and only saw the latter when he cut himself when repairing something. Okay, so wine was red. In different ways you can take that. Wine either as something which is like the idea of intoxication. So maybe here he's trying to think that or wine will, if I take it the other way positive, is like a celebration, so something good. And then blood is danger. Yeah, if you want to be free, oftentimes you have to fight for your freedom. Your freedom, excuse me. You're born free, but the cost of defending freedom is often blood. Yeah. So you're born. It's a very interesting thing. It's a very like ironic thing that every person is born free, but to stay free, you often have to sort of stand up for your freedom. Yeah, you have to make sure that no one takes it from you. You know, and the ideal society is one where the individual no longer has to struggle and fight for their own freedom yet, because we've set up the society such, and this is what it's like. Thankfully, in most of the, no, I say many of the countries, thankfully, where at least where I live and so on, many of the countries, okay, in many countries are striving towards this point, and I think we all essentially know this is true. At least most of us know this is true. I'd say people who choose the other direction of being bad and stuff, they don't, or they do know it's true, but they don't want it to be true. In any case, it's the ideal society, okay, is one where the individual's freedom is guaranteed. We call that rights. That's what you call rights, yeah. And therefore, we don't have to fight for those rights every day. Yeah, you don't have to. Okay, I'm gonna go outside now. I need to make sure that no one, you know, hits me or steps on me or anything. I need to defend myself. It's not like that. We've set up rules and things which are all about the protection of the individual. Okay, that's what the ideal is supposed to be. That's why in Britain, for example, um, that's why in Britain, for example, they had a civil war. Okay, and they took the king's power away from him and they put it into the parliament. Parliament means rule by the people. Okay, you elect a representative who rules, who doesn't rule, but who takes part in the ruling. And if he messes up or she messes up, we can vote to get rid of her. Okay, that's the idea. Democracy, the idea of democracy is you are the king. That's the idea. You are the queen. You as an individual. That's the idea. Uh you are the one in charge, the power. That's the idea. Democratos. That's the idea. It's you are, and it has to be that way, okay? Because if it's not that way, then you get a dictatorship with one person or a few people in charge and everyone else as a slave, all right? Which is not good, obviously. Anyway, so he keeps on looking at the door, keeps on looking at the door and thinking about, how he's been behaving. He had to keep a perpetually smiling face. He's got that fake smile, okay, which you can tell is fake when you talk to him and look at him. But the door he notices is real. Okay, it doesn't pretend to be something it's not. It is what it is. And Mary reflects that. Okay, she reflects that. You can take me or leave me. So Mary again is like the door. She's okay with being herself. And so Murdo admires her, like he is now starting to admire the door. Um Okay, again, just started talking about how he's kind of he really likes her. Murdo stared at the door and he looked at it. It seemed to be drawn inside steep caves and so on. All this you can just imagine as he's just looking at it, reflecting on himself, his own life. Okay, his own life. The door was not a mirror and he couldn't see himself in it. Rather, he was sucked into it as if it was a place of heat and color reality, but it was different and it was his. Um, I would say here, I would say here, what this is, it's not that he can't see himself in the door, it's that one part of him is refusing to see himself in the door. And that's the part of him which has been trained to this point to ignore himself, ignore his true self, and to instead act like everyone else. So essentially, he's like fighting with himself. Right? He's fighting with himself. One part of him wants to just paint the thing blue again or green, and the other part of him is saying, there's something to this individuality, authenticity stuff. Okay, now another thing that I was gonna say was, uh, beyond just the, uh, beyond the thing of the tyranny that can come about on a less sort of extreme uh scale. And it's not really extreme because you tyrannize yourself yet. And I'm gonna explain that actually. Okay, good. The ideas connect. So on the extreme end of the tyranny that happens, you become a slave, yeah, literally. You become an actual slave, okay, to the state. In other words, you get told, have you seen Scarface? Have you ever seen Scarface? If you watch Scarface, you notice at the beginning of the movie, Tony Montana, he says, how would you like it? He's talking about Communist Party. How would you like it if someone told you what to eat, what to think, where to go, how to talk? Okay, have a one, what do you say, Tucci batas in every corner telling you what to do. I've had octopus every day. I got octopus coming out of my ears. What he's saying basically is you literally become a slave. Yeah, it's not like I'm exaggerating here. You get told what to think, what to do, where to go, and if you disobey, you get punished. Possibly with your life, yeah, often with your life, if not with your freedom. Actually, you get put in prison, yeah. So, and it's not an extreme thing. Just look at what's happening in the world today. Again, look at any of the modern dictatorships. Look at what happens when a person starts to question the government, when they start to call for democracy, individual freedom. Look at what happens. In any case, this same tyranny, okay, happens also not just on a big scale, but also happens on a small scale, okay, on a small scale. And what you see here is his illustration of that, which is that the person who acts this way, like you might see this in school if you're in school, with the person that constantly tries to change their dress or their talk in order to try and fit in more. The person who acts this way, or you see it in work also with the person that has that fake smile, that fake laugh, who shakes the boss's hand in a very firm way, looks them in the eye and says, "Boss, that was a great joke." That guy. Um, what you'll notice, okay, is that that person is hyper insecure, like all the time. And the insecurity comes from the constant questioning of themselves, which is that the problem with trying to fit in to the extent of to the extent which goes beyond like actual ethics or morality. In other words, what things should I not do to actually hurt people? And again, I mean actual hurt, like punching someone or like that, real hurt. What when you go beyond actual ethics and you begin to think now about how should I change my personality, how should I change the way I talk, how should I, and so on. The problem with this, okay, is that it's actually impossible to fit in completely with the group. It's impossible. Why? In order to fit in with the group in a perfect way, you would need every group member to think the same, like actually think the same. We already talked about how that's not what actually happens. Yeah, people disagree on things. And then number two, the deeper problem is that in order for me to be like you or to be the way that you want me to be, I would have to read your mind. I would have to know your thoughts, okay, which I can't know. It's not possible for me to know. Even when you tell me what you want, the specifics of what you want, which you leave out, I'm not gonna know. There's a process of interpretation that happens through your words. You tell me something, I interpret it a certain way, and then I act on it. Okay? So I can never fully know what you want, yeah, the way that you want it. I can never fully know how you think, the way that you think fully. Like, I mean, like in perfect detail. So what happens, therefore, is that the person who is desperate to fit in, they are constantly insecure because they are constantly questioning, have I done enough? Have I acted the right way? Have I talked the right way? Did I say that thing the right way? They're constantly criticizing themselves and constantly in a in a situation of being unstable, which is why the person that is constantly trying to fit in or they're always anxious, worried, stressed, afraid, hyper alert, unable to sleep properly and all that, yeah. So this is the other problem. Yeah. It's like when you try to act this way, you lose all your peace, yeah. There's no way that you can have inner peace and also be this kind of person that fits in with everything, yeah. Because it's an impossible task that you're trying to do. And then number two, it's something that you know that you shouldn't be doing. So it's unethical on top of impossible, which is a very bad combination. And what that does, okay, and he's been doing it for 46 years. He's never left the village. Okay, what that leads to, okay, is what that leads to, let me just go back a little bit, is a feeling of deep depression and misery. Feeling of deep depression and misery. If I can find this section. Let me see. Um, okay, here we go. He had been a very serious child, blah, 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 blah. Most of the time he spent, excuse me, this is here. Okay, so he says, this is right in the beginning, okay, deep in the conformity. After all, so he's lying in bed. After all, I have nothing to get up for, really. He says, excuse me. So he says, after all, I have nothing to get up for, really. So essentially what this does to you, okay, if you act this way, if you take on this very bad way of thinking and behaving, what it does to you is it robs you of all hopes of being happy, which is essentially, much of I'd say the motivation for acting this way in the first place is you think that if you fit in and don't offend anyone, then you're more likely to be happier because no one's gonna say anything to you. They're not gonna judge you in any kind of negative way. But again, the problem is, like we just laid out, you're gonna be constantly questioning yourself and judging yourself to an extreme amount, which is gonna make you feel extremely depressed. Okay, extremely depressed. To the point that at this point, he feels like he has nothing to live for. Okay, because he doesn't have a life. He just has a sequence of imitations. Okay, a sequence of what can I do to fit in more, and then trying to do that. So in any case, Murdo has a very bad kind of life. He doesn't really even have a life, okay, because he didn't do anything that he really wants to do. He just copies people. And eventually, so we come to the end of the story now. Eventually, he's thinking, what should I do? What should I do? What should I do? And he decides that he's gonna now go and see Mary. Again, Mary represents individuality. She represents uh, the right way of living, essentially, which is that uh, you should have you should express who you are. Okay, you should express who you are. You should live free. And the idea is live free, but just don't hurt people. And I mean in a real way, yeah. You'd have to distinguish between real heart, which you know in your heart, yeah, what that is. Real heart versus just uh, things which we think we shouldn't say and all that. In any case, so the story basically goes on, and he now looks at her door. He looks at it for a while, and he thinks about knocking on her door. And then he walks to her house. He walks to her house, and he looks at his own door from a distance. So he looks at his own red door that he has now kept. He decided that he didn't destroy it, and he sees that there's a certain pride and spirit about it. And remember, the door represents him. Okay, so he now feels a little bit more confident, a little bit more stronger, proud of himself that he's decided to not destroy the door. And He also feels, it says, it emerged out of the old and habitual, bright and vulnerable. So he's nervous about what he's doing right now, but he knows that something has changed. Something has changed. And the story ends with him saying, it says it said, but it's really him saying, please let me live my own life. The story ends with Murdo essentially deciding that from this point forward, he's now going to stop trying to fit in, and he's now going to try to now start to express himself as an individual. And he knocks on Mary's door because she can help him to do this, because she already does it. Okay. So essentially the story ends, the story ends on a sort of happy, positive note. Okay, so that is the story. That's the story. Key themes, obviously, conformity and uh, dangers of conformity, and so on. Um, Group versus individual, that kind of thing. And it's a very important, like I said, lesson to, think about and learn. We'll be looking at the other Ian Smith stories, and then I've already done a hanging, but I think I'm gonna do it again because what I'd like to explore in a hanging is the like power structure because it illustrates even more clearly what I'm talking about in terms of the structure of tyranny and how it's organized. In any case, well, one thing I should say, I've started a Patreon. Okay, so what you get access to if you sign up, you don't have to yet, don't worry about it, is basically I'm thinking about doing maybe once a week webinar on Zoom, and in there you can ask like questions about any different texts, any philosophical questions that you might have, or questions about different books or texts, or whatever. So if you're interested, you can sign up. It's going to be in the description, in the description. But other than that, just the key, forget about that. Other than that, the key is that once you learn about how to, once you learn about how to not be, so, how to not be a fool that hurts people, once you learn the basics of like ethics, morality, which you're always working on, but let's just say once you learn the basic rules of don't hurt people and that, what's really important, okay, is that you start to express your individuality. You start to focus on yourself and, excuse me, knowing who you are and learning who you are as an individual, a unique individual. One of the most ancient pieces of wisdom, okay, comes from Socrates, who said that uh, I'm paraphrasing, the most important thing is to know yourself, to know yourself. And this was so important. This was so important, okay, that the Greeks and other ancient people used to put it on the temple walls, on the temple walls. So, um, for example, in one of the temples at what's called the Temple of Delphi, where the oracle used to live, who's supposed to be like a keeper of mystical wisdom, or like you say deep wisdom, something. It was written on the wall there, yeah. Know yourself, know yourself. So the point is, okay, that uh, you need to focus on your individuality, while obviously getting along with people, but never at the cost of who you know you are yet. And you need to obviously, this takes time, yeah. It's not just about having some idea of who you think you are, but it takes time to learn. But the point is, don't be fake, yeah. If I could say anything, just don't be fake. Okay, don't lie, yeah. That's the key. If I could teach you anything in these lessons, yeah, it seems again and again and again, the key sort of thing which comes up again is the importance of truth, especially to yourself, yeah. The fundamental, like I said, virtue, the mother of all virtues, is truth, which would tell us then that the fundamental cause of, you could say, evil, things going bad, people doing the wrong thing, is lies, deception. So in any case, just keep that in mind, and if you have any questions, you can put them below. All right.